Thank you for allowing me to join so many young faces. At my age, it's a breath of fresh air to see all these wonderful young faces. And there's an old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I kind of believe that. So with your help, we're going to go through and as you were told, we'll have time for some questions later if your grandfathers or uncles had any stories that you want to hear the rest of it. What was this general like, or what was that general like? We're going to go back, ladies and gentlemen, 72 years. 73. For 1 year, I was trained as a high-speed radio operator, faster than this discussion. Brrr. And the following year, 1944 and 1945, I served in France under General Dwight Eisenhower. He was a fine young man, and he wasn't in charge in his 50s of just 145,000 in uniform. He was in charge of over 3 million men as Supreme Commander of Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Forces. Very briefly, I went over on the Queen Mary 1. It's now in Long Beach, California. And instead of the usual convoys to take the troops there to Europe, preparing for the invasion of Europe, 75, 80 ships with the destroyers protecting them from submarines and torpedoes, the Queen Mary 1 zigzagged faster than the torpedoes and faster than the submarines, and took me to Scotland and then to England, and then we waited for the liberation of Paris, where we opened our orders, about 35 of us, as being assigned to Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Forces. So for the next 2 years, 1944 and 45, after the liberation of France, I served in Supreme Headquarters. Now this is General Eisenhower, who was actually 54 years of age at the time, with a Cadillac car that wherever he went to the various different army groups, all over on the Eastern Front after the invasion and liberation of Paris, it was a Cadillac that we used to put onto a train and take him if it weren't too far. If it were further away, he'd go by air. But wherever he went, ladies and gentlemen, 1 or 2 of us radio operators were his only methods of communication, except for pigeons. And we were a little more rapid than pigeons. There was no other way for him to communicate, so we would sit in the back seats, always ready to do any communications for him by high-speed radio. This is George Patton. General Patton was a very interesting man. The Germans, all during the military activities in World War II, said he's their best general. There's nobody better than George Patton. We have to keep an eye on him. This is Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany. Wherever he goes is where the action is. So we used to fake places. We're going to invade Marseille, Biarritz, all different fake things to throw them off. And meanwhile, he's upstairs, 1 flight up, in a 1-bedroom apartment without any command. But they always thought he's their best general. George Patton, he was a very interesting man. One more brief story about him. He loved to pray. He was very religious. He was from New England, the Boston area. And like this guy Tebow in football, every time they get a touchdown, he'd kneel and pray. The same thing with General Patton. The only difference was when he prayed, every other word was a 4-letter word. He prayed with a lot of vulgarity. That's George Patton. This is General Montgomery, I see, and General Hodges, General Bradley, General Patton, and General Monty. General Bernard Montgomery, ladies and gentlemen, the British general who was sometimes called a marshal. He was in charge of the 21st British Army Group, which included Canadians, Australians, Sikh Indians, all sorts of troops were part of under his command. And guess what? Of all the generals you're going to hear about today in Supreme Headquarters, who do you think was General Ike's favorite general? Monty Montgomery, Bernard Montgomery, the British. A lot of people say, what? He was a little bit like Patton. He had a little ego and this and that, but he was the favorite general in Supreme Headquarters. General Montgomery, he's the man to the extreme right. Oh, it says Air Marshal Tedder with a pipe. The fellow with the pipe, if you can see him, I think he's on the right of General Eisenhower, was Air Marshal Tedder, T-E-D-D-E-R. He was seconding command to General Eisenhower. Anytime they needed a replacement to make decisions and all, Air Marshal Arthur Tedder would do it. He's in that photo. Okay, Dave. Here he is again, General Eisenhower talking to his generals and all. Maybe you'll ask me questions about him more in detail. Next, please, Dave. Here's General Patton on one side of him, and General Bradley. Omar Bradley was a great, great general, always competing with General Patton, but they remained good. They remained friends and had dinners together, but they disagreed on a lot of military things, which I'll discuss with you later on. Next, please, Dave. This is the Palace of Versailles, 18 miles out of Paris. The Louis XIV and Louis XV resided here with Marie Antoinette, if you like that part of history. And right behind the Palace of Versailles was the Grand and Petit Écurie, the stables for the horses and the carriages and all. And Supreme Headquarters happened to be in the basement of the Petit Écurie, the small stables. Had the Germans ever found that out and bombed us, we'd be sprechen an Deutsch heute. We'd be speaking in German today instead of English. But that's the location. These are from my collection, so I don't have a picture of Supreme Headquarters, but it was right behind the palace. Next, please, Dave. This, after the Battle of the Bulge in late 1944, in the cold winter of 1944, after the Battle of the Bulge, where the Germans made one final attempt to win the war by creating a bulge. Now, the bulge was not from here in Tempe to downtown Phoenix, 10 or 11 miles. The bulge was 60 miles, and we were worried that we have to leave our headquarters because we'll be caught behind the lines. But somehow we survived the Battle of the Bulge, which was heavy losses on both sides, and moved from Versailles or Paris to Reims. The Americans call it Reims, but it's Reims in French. And this is the building where the surrender took place in May of 1945. It was called École Professionnelle. It was a professional school in lieu of a college. It was teaching you how to be good mechanics, engineers, air conditioning, what have you. And that was our headquarters. Next, please, Dave. Here it is. It had a campgrounds on the inside, and we were in the first floor, and down the hall from us was one of the pictures coming up now, but that's where the surrender took place. Next, please, Dave. This is the dining room where we used to eat. A large room. And here, ladies and gentlemen, the next picture, Dave, thank you, is the war room where the surrender took place. All the people that surrendered representing the Soviet Union, at that time it was Russia, and the Polish, and the Free French, and the Americans, and the British, which included all the people from various countries of the British Empire. Surrendered. This was down the hall from our communications room. I was going to say from here to the back of the room, but that's too close. Maybe triple of this size of the room in that direction was this room here. Next, please, Dave. There they are sitting around. The only people allowed to talk about the surrender or get to be intimate were the Stars and Stripes. And I can't remember the guy in charge of it. He was quite a newspaper man. But he has all the people sitting around. Their General Jodl, J-O-D-L, Gustav Jodl, the German, is sitting next to Admiral von Friedberg on one side. He was the in charge of the German Navy and a translator. And alongside, all around him are all the other allies. The only one out at the table, ladies and gentlemen, was General Eisenhower. He had read a book about Hannibal the Great when they invaded the Roman Empire, that the leader doesn't talk to the enemy or negotiate, unlike what happened yesterday in Singapore. He doesn't show up. He had at this table General Walter Bedell Smith, who is in the middle of the Allies. And General Smith, I'm going to take a moment to tell you about him. Walter Bedell Smith, I called him Beetle. He was a lieutenant general that never went to West Point, never went to Virginia Tech. He started as a private, corporal, sergeant, second lieutenant, first lieutenant, went all the way up the rank. And Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith was the only one that would drive his own car. All the others, the general would sit in the back, and we'd salute him in the back. But General Smith in the front seat, he looked a little like my dad. He's a husky, big guy, 5'11", maybe 6, 245 pounds. My mother was 90 pounds. A small 4'11", 4'10" lady, and I'm in between the two. No brothers, no sisters. I was the only child. But there's the war room where the surrender took place. Next, please, Dave. Guess which one is me in the upper picture, ladies and gentlemen? I'm the second from the right, or the third from the right, left. That was in Ripon College, Wisconsin, where I spent several months, along with Champaign, Illinois, the University of Illinois. And it was the credits that I received in both of these places, the college and the picture on the right is my Marine friend John Kish. And we say he was a Marine, and we had come home after basic training. So that was a picture of John and myself. But back to Ripon College. Ripon College in Wisconsin, ladies and gentlemen, is the birthplace of the Republican Party. In 1943, when I was there, Wendell Willkie came to speak in the snow. He was running for election. He was a good man, nice man, and in this cottage, the birthplace of the Republican Party, was known to everybody. Abraham Lincoln, what have you. This is where the party was born. And when I went back there years later, in my son's little, what would you call it, station wagon that has a shower and a TV and a set one. I asked my wife if she would like to accompany me, and she said no, but one of the benefits of your fathers and grandfathers is I went along. I said, I want to take a trip like this fellow that used to be on Sundays going on the back roads of America. Well, I can't remember his name, he was a heavy-set man. Taking the back roads of the country and seeing the country that way. In Ripon College, when I went back on that trip to visit the college grounds, I said, what happened to the birthplace cottage? It's not here. They said, oh, we moved it into downtown Ripon, so you'll have to go down there several blocks away. And I rushed down there, and there was this picture of Wendell Willkie talking to and there was I in one little corner of the picture when he came running for president of the United States in 1943. Boy, we're going back 74 years, ladies and gentlemen. Quite an enjoyable thing for me to do on occasion. Yeah, this is the actual message that our family and I donated to Arizona State University about 20 years ago. It's one original, and it was sent in code, but I have the translation, and I brought it to me, and if we have time, You may like to hear the actual words translated from coded to English that ended World War II, so that one original is unlike the Declaration of Independence, where they made 28 originals. That's Thomas Jefferson, who wrote most of it, as you know, and one for Alexander Hamilton, one for John Adams, one for our ambassador to France, the elderly man. What was his name?
Benjamin Franklin.
Somebody help me.
Franklin?
Benjamin Franklin, thank you. Benjamin Franklin, one for each copy. There were 28 originals. This is just one of one, and it's sitting at the Hayden Library with 10 or 11 other messages, some in German, some in English, leading up to the surrender. Because when the German, we'll get to that. Dave, next, please. On the bottom left, bottom right, there's the German admiral with his entourage coming to Supreme Headquarters to surrender, and the German admiral with their 5, 10, 15 people in their entourages, very strict. They were trembling in their presence, unlike the informality of American troops, where we were more friendly with each other than they were. And the rest of the pictures of Air Marshal Tedder in the upper right with General Eisenhower and so forth and so on. Next, please, Dave. Now, this is a very interesting picture. Look at this one carefully, because we can't discuss it in too much detail, but I can tell you some interesting things about it. In the upper picture you see, ladies and gentlemen, this is after the surrender took place on May 7th, 1945. I had sent the message around 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, and then Eisenhower came down and met everybody, and you'll notice over his right shoulder the picture of a lady. That was Kay Summersby. Kay Summersby was a lieutenant, thanks to General White insisting she get that rank of second lieutenant. And then with the pipe is General Beadle Smith. But you notice in the bottom, they wiped her out and they replaced her with a he. The reason is she was ostensibly General Eisenhower's chauffeur, but there was a little more to it, to their relationship that 90% of the world knows. Now, I'm writing a book about the story of my life, and I have to call General Eisenhower's son, John, and ask his permission. How far can I go with this story? And I wouldn't do it without the Eisenhower's family possession, but that was his so-called chauffeur, Kay Summersby. And they said, no, we can't have a picture of her in this such a momentous moment, the surrender of and ending the war in Europe. So they erased her and they replaced the guy's head in the photo. You'd never know it, would you? Next, please. This is the date. My message says that I'm sent on May 7th in the middle of the night, that the war will end on May 8th at 11:01 p.m. Some people think it's a.m., but I think I should know since I sent the message. It's 11:01 p.m. the following day, and pandemonium broke loose in the world, ladies and gentlemen. In all the cities, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, London, Paris, that the war in Europe and in excess of 15 million soldiers, not 145,000, and stopped firing at each other and stopped shooting at each other. So anyway, that's why the May 8th date is up there. It was quite a day. Next, please, Dave. Here is General Patton, Hodges, Bradley, Simpson, and Giraud is the French representative, the Free French, wearing Soviet decorations. They received honors from the Soviet Union, which, as you know, today is Russia. But then they had 340 million or so. Now they have what? Russia is what? 280? No, maybe around 300. But of course, all the countries making up the Soviet Union got their so-called liberty, whether it was the Ukraine, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia. So anyway, for what it's worth, here's a picture of some of his generals. In my life, I was sitting in law school when I came back in 1946, and after 2 weeks it was so boring. We had we had to wear our uniforms, whether you're a Marine or an Army, Navy. There were no factories in the United States making regular clothes until 7 or 8 months later. My dad was able to get me 2 suits. So we all were attending law school. And the reason I got into law school, I'll never forget Dean Harold Prince said, Melikian, you're just a few credits short of me getting you a seat in law school, but you went to the University of Illinois in Champaign and you went to Ripon College. If you'll get those credits and don't mail it, hand carry it up to Albany, the capital, and file these papers, I'll save a seat in law school. And that's exactly what happened. And to this day, my sons are over 60. I still remind them, if it's important enough, don't depend on the mail. Physically take it yourself. In 1948, the United States Air Force said, Melikian, they tapped me on the shoulder and said, you got your discharge from the Army, so did we. We're no longer the U.S. Army Air Corps. We're now the United States Air Force. That was in 1948, and they commissioned me a first lieutenant. That long ago. Now, I've been retired as an honorary brigadier general by the chief, highest man in the Air Force itself, personally retired me as a general. Next, please. There's Dr. Laddie Coors, the president before Michael Crow, and my wife Emma is on his left, and on the right, I'm about to hug a Mr. and Mrs. Del Lewis. Del and Mrs. Lewis had a doctor's degree in education, and as a little girl, her father was Ernest McFarland, Senior. He was majority leader in the U.S. Senate. He came back to Arizona for majority leader of the United States Senate and became governor of Arizona. If that's not enough, he became Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court, and this is his daughter. I did it in honor of him giving us the GI Bill of Rights, which sent me through law school. Next, and Laddie Corp, if we go back, here's Laddie holding the original. I said, Laddie, you're leaving after 10 years, excellent years as president. What do you know about this new man, Michael Crow? And he said, Greg, I was on the committee that brought him here. Don't worry about him. He's okay. And was he right? Was he right? Michael Crow himself likes to say, I came here from Columbia University to go public, to go, what's the word I'm losing out, to go global. And the Melikian Center is doing exactly going global with all our languages and critical languages. So there's Mr. and Mrs. Del Lewis and Emma and Greg Melikian. Next, please. Here was a brief article about I made the gift of the 10, 11, or 12 with the original message, ending the war in Europe. Next, please. And another message about ending the war and donating. It was a pleasure. The accountant said, Greg, you have any idea? This is one original. When they made the Declaration of Independence, they made 28 copies. Yours is one original. I said, I don't care what you tell me, what the value would go to. It was worth about $1,750,000. They said every year would go up 400,000 or 500,000. I said, I don't care what you tell me. If there's a fire in my house and we lose this one original, or somebody steals a small safe I have, any two of us could carry the safe out. I'm not taking any chances. I'm donating it for safekeeping to Arizona State University's Hayden Library. Next, please. John McCain. John McCain, whether you agree with him or not, and it makes no difference, is a war hero. He could land an airship on an aircraft carrier at night bobbling. If that isn't a hero, that's so difficult. Among all the other things he did, including the 5.5 years he served in Hanoi as a prisoner of war. So there's John McCain and me taking a picture at the Luke Air Force Base, which I was honorary commander of for 4 years, of both the 944th Reserves and the 56th Fighter Wings, total approximately 14,000 men. So I spent 4 years as honorary commander of the Luke Air Force Base. Next, please, Dave. And there is General Harris, General Jerry Harris, the head of the 56th Fighter Wing, is handing me the battle flag, meaning we used to joke, if he's not there, I'm in charge of Luke Air Force Base. But I am the only individual that's ever in the history of Luke Base that's served both fighter wings, the 922nd and 56th. No other person has been given that honor. So I'm very proud of that. Next, please. This is a picture of my wife and myself on the left. She's starry-eyed. She can't believe that I was awarded the French Legion of Honor by the President of France and his representatives. And there's a copy of it. It's one of the highest, if not the highest, military medal in the world. Nothing is higher than the French Legion of Honor, which Napoleon used to wear proudly in 1802. And there I am a few weeks later at halftime at the University of Washington State ASU game. They were kind enough to, at halftime, to announce the fact that I had received the French Legion of Honor, so I'm wearing the medal. The guy on my right is Pascal Trailer. He was a student of the Critical Languages Institute at ASU. And the girl on the left, I had dinner with her about 6 months ago, her family. And it was, I first named Behinas, a Hispanic little girl. She speaks fluent Pashto and Uzbek. He speaks fluent Farsi. And my wife said they don't even have accents. They speak so perfectly after learning at the Melikian Center, CLI. So that's that picture. Next, please. There's a picture of me in Paris in 1944, early 45. And here's a more recent picture about in 2013 where the Ellis Island Medal of Honor was awarded to me. And it says in the middle of that, our writing, that recipients of that medal have been the last 6 presidents of the United States. And I was honored to receive that great medal. And it ends up saying that, let's see if I can read it from here. Or maybe I can read it from here. It's a very interesting saying. Oh shucks, I can't read it. What it says is somebody with the organization that bestows the honor on you, that patriotism is not a 45-second burst of patriotism, is really a lifetime of service to our country. And in the military, I always had that excuse. In the military, we don't talk about politics too much because of the military background. But I always think being a good American, that's what the saying said. And I made sure, Steve, that the guy that said it, Chairman Nasser Karambi, became a multi-billionaire, came here from Iran, and said that that's a true statement, it's a lifetime, and I've hoped to be a good American. Forget, you want to be a Republican, fine. You want to be a Democrat, fine. You want to be, what's that third party? Uh, Independence, or there's a name? Say it again. I can't hear you. Libertarian, thank you. The Libertarian Party, fine, you can belong to them, but it's more important that we become good Americans. We have a country to run, ladies and gentlemen. It's a little bit more important than the party that you like. So that's what the saying says about patriotism. Next. That's it. Are there any questions, ladies and gentlemen, that your grandfathers, your uncles told you about serving in World War II?
Rick, could you take us back to the actual night when the surrender, how much did you know and why were you chosen to send?
Oh, that's a good question, Steve.
To send out the announcement?
Thank you, Steve. A week or so earlier, before the ending of the war, a German Admiral von Friedberg and the German general and Gustav Jodl came with their entourages to surrender. So we started taking bets, the radio operators, which shift? 7 p.m. to 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. in the morning, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. I was on the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. There were 3 of us on duty. General King was a cigar smoking. Did we have a picture of him, Steve? Dave? Did we go through it? We may have. Anyway, he was a 35-year-old cigar smoking in the radio with the radio operator. The keys we had, only capitals. Yeah, there he is. General King was 35 years of age. This is what Dr. Battleton wanted me to talk about. Then there was a second kid, I can't remember his name, from South and North Dakota. He was 28 or 29, and I was 19 going on 20. So word came back to Melikian, the youngest. He should be the one to send the message. Would you like me to read the original message, please? May I do that? Okay, it's one page, roughly 78 words. It was sent in code, and then I immediately had a lieutenant friend of mine instantly translated into English. I loved history. I was bad in mathematics and all, but I was good in history. And I knew that this was something that I'd love a copy of. Now it says here, GSN from JEJO. JEJO stood for the code name for Supreme Headquarters, Maine. Supreme Headquarters rear was in London. Supreme Headquarters, this was Supreme Headquarters forward in Reims. Supreme Headquarters Maine was outside of Paris. So this is from Supreme Headquarters forward. JEJO-000-000. That meant top priority, drop everything. This is highest priority. NA515T, JARI, JABM, code names for different military groups. QHR-QHRBT, from Schaeff forward 070410B, TP1, Aguar, AGWAR, that was some of the military groups. 2, AMSO, AMSSO. 3, Military Mission Moscow. We had to send a message to London, Washington, Moscow, all the capitals. That's number 3 is Military Mission Moscow. NFO 4 was Air Force Headquarters, and 5 was Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Forces Maine, and 6 was Supreme Headquarters Rear. And the message goes as follows. Confidential, paragraph 1 PD, period. A representative of the German High Command signed the parent to combined chiefs of staff and to British chiefs of staff for action, signed Eisenhower. This was in code, period. This is SOAF 347, period, unparent, unconditional surrender of all German land, GMA, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Force and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command at 0141 hours, 11:01 p.m. Central European Time, 7 May, 1945. Now I'm going to just interrupt this message for a second and tell you that, what was I going to tell you? I forgot my point, so I'll continue reading. General Susloparov, Ivan Susloparov, was the man. I could still close my eyes and see General Eisenhower. He represented the Soviet Union or Russia. And for 2 years, Eisenhower would have his arm around him, telling stories and jokes. They were very close. He was a nice man, and he spent 2 years in Supreme Headquarters representing, what is that picture I saw? Joseph Stalin, the death of Joseph Stalin, which is another story in itself, and General Zhukov, who was the General Eisenhower of the Soviet Union, the Russians. Quite a nice man, too, General Zhukov. All active operations will cease, period, paragraph 3, period. Request mission, inform Soviet High Command, and acknowledge, period, paragraph 4, period. No, repeat, no release is being made to the press by this headquarters, pending an announcement by the 3 governments. They wanted the governments to make the announcement before we did. And that's the message that ended World War II, sitting at the Hayden Library with 10 or 11 others, one by General Beadle Smith. I'd like to tell you about him. General Smith, the guy that drove the car, the only general, would learned after the war ended Russian. He didn't go to the CLI, but he learned Russian and became the United States ambassador to the Soviet Union or Russia. What a man Beadle Smith was, an amazing general. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Any other questions?
First one is, how old are you?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm 94 years old. Thank you.
All right, question part 2. Did you have anything to do with the formation of Dwight D. Eisenhower's People-to-People International Program for Children?
Never heard of it. That was after the war. He became our president after being president of Columbia University. He became president of the United States.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, first off.
Yes.
So, you have lived a very grandiose life, much of which has been documented and recorded. So, say for instance, there was no record of anything you have done. What would be like the 3 things that you want to leave as your legacy and or advice to those coming after you?
I don't think that much of that so much. I know there's the young are born and the older go on and life goes on. And I kid my wife that I'd like to do what the Indians do. We have a home for the last 20 years in Flagstaff with a view of the peaks, an uninterrupted view of the peaks. And on the way up, I'd like to go up like the Native Americans, pick a tree, sit there, and that's the end of your life. I often think that the family doesn't think much of the idea. They'd rather be buried in Scottsdale, where we have 8 or 10 we purchased in the cemetery there. But that idea of the tree and the Native Americans go up. But I would love to tell a brief story to a wonderful Black American. Just a few months ago at the Ritz-Carlton, now called another Cranby, in the main ballroom, the niece of Dick Gregory, the comedian, honored me with a room full of people, including, I think, Arizona State University had a table, 800, 900, 1,000 people. And I took a picture with the Tuskegee pilots. They were great. the Tuskegee was a black American, not living together yet, not assimilated yet, and I took a picture. It was a great honor for me to take the sons of those Tuskegee pilots in World War II, who little did they know that we would take our engines, these I forgot what companies made them, anyway, American engines out, and put in Rolls Royces for the Tuskegee to escort the bombers. Going over, the sky would be completely covered by 800 after the Battle of the Bulge, flying over Germany, bombing, but the heavy losses. But the Tuskegee pilots escorted with Rolls-Royce engines, American planes, the bombers. They escorted the bombers to go there, do their bombing, and get back. And oh my God, 100, 200 of the planes would be shot down. They were heavy losses. The Americans would bomb in the daytime, and the British at night, you could hear when you were sleeping, brrr, flying over you, over Germany to lay their bombs. Day and night, that memory is still with me. But thank you for your question.
Good afternoon, sir. Another two-part question. Were you still in Europe when Patton was killed in his car accident?
No,
Okay.
I had come home.
Do you know what everybody's reaction was, since you worked with most of the upper echelon then, of how they felt when Patton died in his car accident?
I think everybody was depressed. He was a great general. He used a lot of bad language, even in his prayers, as you now know. But he was a great general, even though he did wrong and he slapped the enlisted man, and he did. Everybody makes mistakes, but George Patton was upstairs. I should tell you this one brief question to your. I should respond to your question by saying, George Patton, or did I tell you the story already, had no title, no command, until after the Battle of the Bulge. General Eisenhower called him up and said, George, I'm going to give you the Third Army, 1,200,000 men with tanks. Now, up in Bastogne, on the Belgian border, there's a division of American soldiers surrounded by the Germans, and they've been told, either you surrender or we're going to wipe you out. They were a parachute 101st Airborne division of 18,000 young men. All we needed to open up was a wedge to get them out. So the Germans went to their leader, and I can't remember his name now, the general, but they said, General, either you surrender or else we wipe you out. There's no getting out of this. So General Ike asked Patton, would he go up there in 18 hours in the snow of 1944? Cold weather. He said, George, can you get up there and get those 18,000 troops, open a wedge, maybe double this room, triple this room, and release them? Can you get up there in 18 hours and do that for me? And he said, I'll do it, Ike. And he did it. He opened up the wedge, and the entire 18,000 soldiers got out of, what was the name of that city? Bastogne, Belgium.
Hello, sir. Thank you for coming and everything you've done. I have a question about foreign languages. Did they play a role in your military career and your life until now? And how do you see foreign languages becoming more or less important with computers?
Thank you for that question. There's very few questions that would be more important than learning critical languages, learning languages. We Americans are a little lazy. We don't like to learn languages, but we can't afford to have the oceans protect us, the Pacific and the Atlantic. Critical languages are absolutely essential. If you speak the language of somebody else, you're speaking to his heart. He appreciates the fact that you're not the same as him nationwide, but you're speaking his language. How many things could be more important than speaking to somebody's heart? Very rare. So we think critical languages teaching people, maybe if they talk to each other, they won't bomb each other and their children and all. Maybe we can avoid these crazy wars. General Eisenhower, when they asked him what his opinion of war was, I forgot to bring the exact words, but he said, for a man who should know something about war, in charge of 3.5, 4 million soldiers, for a man who should know something about war, war is wasteful, useless, on and on. It's a waste of time, it's stupidity. So when I give lectures on cruise ships of 1,800, 2,400 in the middle of the Pacific or the Atlantic where they can't go shopping, they have to listen to me. I read the exact words of General Eisenhower. War is stupidity. It was then, it was now. We have to stop this way of settling things. So, does that answer your question? Languages are essential. The critical languages, I think, is one of the most, I mean, Michael Crow is very fond of what we're doing and going global with your languages. We're teaching Indonesian now. We're teaching all these languages that you know more better than me. So yes, we're proud of that.
Working with General Eisenhower, what kind of relationship developed between you two? And as a second part, did you keep in touch with him at all after the war, after leaving the service?
That was not possible. I would have to salute him every night and every daytime. In the morning, he'd be sitting in the back seat of his limousine, and we'd salute, he'd smile and accept your salute. But we didn't have lunch and dinner together at all. I should say, for the Jewish American people in the audience, just 3 or 4 days before the war ended, they liberated, was it Auschwitz or Belsen, one of the camps that was originally built for the Russian prisoners that the Germans were capturing, 180,000, 210,000, huge masses, and bringing them to Auschwitz. But then they changed it to the Holocaust, and you know the terrible things they did to the Jewish community. But that was originally for Russian prisoners of war. And the point I was going to make is they showed this to General Eisenhower. He never used foul language, never. Except when he came back from visiting that camp. It took a day and a half to calm him down. He couldn't stand those, every other word, 4-letter words, this inhumanity, man against man, that they perpetrated at the camp, because it became the camp where they did all the terrible things to the Jewish community. So he was very, very upset at that.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm a history student here at ASU, and I specialize in the Second World War, so for me it's really fascinating. And I was just wondering, towards the end of the war, did you have the feeling that there were already tensions developing between Americans and Russians, or was it still pretty cordial?
We went into the Cold War in Berlin, and they wouldn't let us bring supplies and equipment into Berlin, so we had to bring them by air. It was very difficult, very difficult. And we went through the Cold War for many years until the Soviet Union in, 1990, 91 broke up. And now we have the Putin scaring the heck out of us. But evidently the Russians like him for his patriotism, and we don't have time to discuss him, but the name of our organization is the Melikian Center, Russian, Eastern European languages whatsoever. So, but I never had any contact with him. He became our president. He was a good golfer. He played a lot of golf. His wife was an alcoholic, Mamie. I can't go too far in this case, but they were just married in name only. Let me put it that way. And I'm wondering what his son, how much permission I'll give, because he needed a bat to keep the women chasing him all during my 2 years. And I have to be very careful with how I can share any further information about that. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Hi, I was wondering, during the war, how many different countries were you stationed in?
I went to Scotland. I went to Birmingham, England. We waited for time to cross the English Channel to Fontainebleau, the capital of the kings of France, 45 miles outside of Paris, waiting for the liberation of the city. The moment it was liberated, the next day we drove in. And so it would be Scotland, England, France, and then Germany. We had not bombed in Germany, where the next headquarters, we had already prearranged it. So it was 3 miles around that E.J. Farben, I.E. Farben building, a pharmaceutical building, elevators that kept running like an escalator. They never stopped. And you stepped on and off. That was our next headquarters until I went over on the largest ship. It was not a cruise ship, it was an ocean liner, the Queen Mary. And I came back on a 10,000-ton small ship when my time came to leave Europe and get home. Many of my friends stayed. Many of my friends spent 8-9 years there. A guy named Glenn Ross from Nebraska stayed there, studied opera, married an Italian girl, and came back and became the director of the Seattle Opera Company. Now he had trouble after 10 or 12 years, and he came to Phoenix, and I happened to be president of the Arizona Opera Company. My wife is classical minded in music, and she thought she got me out of Monday Night Football, which I still watch every Monday. But Glenn Ross he called me up and said, "Greg, what's with your opera company?" I said, "Well, we owe $130,000 or so." He said, "I'm leaving Seattle. I'll come to Phoenix. If you'll collect and don't get donations for the $130,000, I'll match it from outside funds." And he took over opera. And I learned one lesson from him. When you're doing business with other people's money, ladies and gentlemen, a non-profit entity, here's what he taught me. You don't spend a nickel of the public's money unless you got a dime in your pockets. And I repeat those words. Now the opera company, the ballet company, the symphony company are all complaining in the mayor of Phoenix's office. They're all sitting around, all complaining there's not enough money. And they said, "Melikian, how come you're so quiet? We had a surplus. We had 100 and some odd thousand. We were afraid to tell the public we have more money than we need because of you don't spend a nickel unless you have a dime." And I've learned that lesson about nonprofits. If it's your money, spend all you want. But if you're spending other people's money, don't borrow it. We'll collect it later. We'll get donations later. Later doesn't happen that easy. So that was Glenn Ross. What a great director of the opera company he was.
First of all, I want to say thank you for speaking to all of us here. It's been very informative. And this question is more representing the ROTC cadets here. And I wanted to know if you had any tips for new lieutenants joining the military.
I think it's a wonderful career. I think it's a great career to be in uniform, but not to be sent in harm's way. Not to be sent where you can lose a leg, lose an arm. We have just reached a number of 40,000 amputees and 12 to 15 suicides. 12 to 15 a day. This is just, I would love our uniformed officers and military of all ranks to go all over the world as goodwill ambassadors, not to be put in harm's way. Enough of the losing legs and arms. Those marriages don't last a year. They just don't last. The wife won't tell you the real reason, but every night with a guy missing a leg or 2 legs or what have you. Not too long ago, before this present governor of Arizona, became our governor. The former governor was a lady. Anybody help me with the name?
Janet Napolitano.
No,
Oh,
after
Jan
her.
Brewer.
After her.
Jan Brewer.
Say it again.
Jan Brewer.
Jan Brewer, thank you. They were having, amputees were having they have a league, they play baseball with each other. And they had come to Scottsdale to play a baseball game. One leg missing, one arm missing. And a guy jumped out of a parachute in the baseball field. Halfway down, he opened the flag, half the size of the infield, landed, came over to us, the mayor hugged him, and then I hugged him. 2 legs stumps. He lost 2 legs, a young 28, 29-year-old kid. I don't want that from you guys. You do enough serving us as goodwill ambassadors. No more being put in harm's way with, what do they call him now? When you service, there's a name, he was deployed. No more 2nd and 3rd and 4th deployed until ultimately you're wounded and then you come back. I don't care for that. I believe in peace, and then I say, if you don't believe me, here's General Eisenhower's words. Blame him for liking peace. But there's no room for war anymore. But it's a great honor to be in a uniform. I don't think I have to tell this group anything. This group looks to me like a class group of, I'm so honored to be in your presence. It's my pleasure. You don't need any advice from me. Just do what you're doing and be good at it. One thing I'd like to do, because if I individual names, I'll forget so many, but there's a Dr. Rubin. Dr. Gabe Rubin was the superintendent of the Scottsdale school system, and he and I have known each other, what is it, Gabe, 88 years?
Just about.
88 years, and Gabe was, and there was a lady whose daughter was taken out of the Scottsdale school system to the other side of the street, and she wanted me to call the superintendent of schools. So I called Gabe, maybe 15, 20 years ago, and he was a bachelor. I said, dapper Gabe. Is Penny with you? Is Penny with you, Gabe?
I didn't hear that.
Is Penny with you, your wife?
No.
I mean, the women would go crazy over this guy. I mean, he was and I called him, I said, Dr. Rubin, I said, I'm asking you if you could do a favor to this lady who wants her daughter to remain in you. He said, Kiki, K-I-K-I. He said, Kiki, is that you? My nickname until I went to law school and what have you was Kiki. I said, are you Naughty Gabe? Naughty Gabe was a naughty, adorable student, but he used to play tricks and had a great sense of humor, and once was kept from graduating in elementary school. I said, is this Naughty Gabe? You became an educator? So Gabe Rubin is now on the advisory board of the Melikian Center with Penny, his wonderful Canadian-American wife. Thank you for making it, Gabe.
Go ahead.
I was wondering, what would be the best and the worst memories that you have from being in the war?
That's a pretty good question. One of the things when I close my eyes about my participation in World War II is the Catholic 19, 20, 21-year-old nuns. The Catholic nuns that used to come and look in our garbage for any waste. They were starving in France. Can you imagine that? These young girls used to go through the garbage cans of the waste we sometimes make from lunch, dinner, and breakfast. And that picture comes in front of me. One more thing that came to my mind here that I just happened to think of. There was a secret organization in Supreme Headquarters for the Jewish American community amongst us today. They were called Churchill's Butchers. They were all born in Palestine or Israel today. They were called Sabras, and they were Winston Churchill's private regiment of any tough personal jobs to do secretly. these kids born in today Israel or Palestine, whatever you want to call it, were called Churchill's butchers. And they would go on these hard, difficult World War II assignments. So they don't all become accountants. They don't all become lawyers. They were military also. They can be proud of that.
Okay, thank you so much. We give Mr. Melikian a round of applause.
Thank you.